This is Scott Dill with Real Story Group, and you're on today's briefing about applying design thinking to technology selection. Our managing director and lead analyst, Jared Jingers, is going to join us momentarily. And really, the foundation for today's presentation about this particular philosophy is the foundation for the book that Jared and our founder, Tony Byrne, recently published on the right way to select technology. So if you hadn't had an opportunity to look at that publication as yet, I'm sure Jared will provide some details later in today's session where you can actually get an e-copy of that book. So certainly encourage you to take a look at that. But as we get started here, I wanted to mention a couple quick things about Real Story Group for those of you that are new to us. Our goal as a company is to really provide you with the real story about digital technology vendors, what they do well, but maybe more importantly, what they don't do so well and where they could potentially fall short for you. So we publish research on 8 different marketplaces where we analyze the strengths of and weaknesses of the vendors, and then provide you with tools to create a customized shortlist and compare the vendors side by side. We also work on a number of technology selection engagements throughout the year where we actually come on site, be an extension of your team, and help you to select a solution or to develop a strategic roadmap as you continue to move forward with your digital strategy. We also have a tool called Real Score where you can benchmark your digital effectiveness against your industry peers and then create a roadmap for yourself to look at and check in on as you move forward. The marketplaces that we cover typically fall into 2 buckets. It's digital marketing technology, such as web content management or digital asset management, and digital workplace technology, things like social collaboration and enterprise portals. And we always would encourage you to take a look at our site where you can download an excerpt from any or all of these different research areas. The other thing that's unique about Real Story Group, beyond just being focused on content-based technology, is the fact that we do no work for the vendors that we evaluate. So we don't speak at their conferences or write white papers for them or advise them on their strategy. Our only function is to help you as a technology user and buyer make sure that you're making an educated choice as you're looking to select a digital technology product moving forward. So one thing I do want to make mention of, if you do have questions, please feel free to enter those into the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. Also, for those that are subscribers, you'll be able to access a recording of today's presentation in your subscriber library later this week. And for those of you that are attendees but aren't subscribers, we'll still send you out a copy of the slides for today's presentation. So thank you very much for your time. I'm going to turn things over to Jared.
Thanks, Scott, and thank you all for taking some time out of your busy days to join us for this. We appreciate it as always. As Scott mentioned, the basis of today's webinar about applying design thinking to the technology selection process really comes from this book that we just had published at the end of last year from Rosenfeld Media called The Right Way to Select Technology. And if you look on the screen here, if you go to the rosenfeldmedia.com website and you use this code RM-SRT, you can get a 20% discount. Additionally, you can find it on Amazon, and if you do get a chance to read it, we'd love to hear what you think. So feel free to post a comment on Amazon or send it to us directly, and we'd be glad to hear it. As Scott mentioned as well, what made it into this webinar, as well as what made it into the book, really comes from our work as industry analysts and consultants. So we evaluate about 150 different digital technologies on an ongoing basis, evaluating on what they do well and what they don't do so well. And if you want to get a real flavor of what that in-depth analysis looks like, feel free to download a sample research excerpt at realstorygroup.com/sample. So let's get into it. This is our somewhat famous or infamous vendor technology or technology vendor map, if you will. Sometimes we call it our subway map. This is our world, the world that we live in. These are the vendors that we're watching on an ongoing basis. And for better or for worse, as a buyer in today's day and age, you have options. But with options comes some risk and some risk that you might make a bad decision. And so, really, what we're trying to attack in today's webinar is a question that we ask all the time when helping our clients, and that is, why do about half of IT projects fail? And I'm sure there are many veterans of technology and IT folks and business folks who have been part of the process of bringing new technology into your own enterprises. And you all know that there's many reasons that IT projects fail. There's a lot that can go wrong during implementation. There's a lot that can go wrong during the rollout period, whether it's to do with change management, whether it's to do with the way that people are trained, and just overall education on it as to why this technology was even implemented in the first place. So there's a lot that can go wrong. But really, at Real Story Group, our mission has been to help organizations help organizations better their chances of being successful by choosing the right technology at the outset. Really, nothing saddens me more than seeing an organization pick a technology that is fundamentally ill-suited for what it is they're trying to do, and the chances of your project being successful in the long run are just remarkably less if you pick the wrong technology from the start. So our mission at Real Story Group is to find a solution to this tough problem. And recently, when we went about writing this book, we came across a lot more thoughts and thinking around the term design thinking. And Stanford's D School has done a lot of work in this space, and I encourage you to check out what they've done. But they define design thinking as a process and way of thinking about tough to solve problems. And again, we think that how do we prevent IT projects from failing? That was the problem that we were trying to solve. So we said, what if we could apply this design thinking process and methodology to the tech selection process? But before we get into how we look to do that and how we think that design thinking applies, let's talk about design thinking in general. Let's define this a little bit. So design thinking's been around for the term design thinking, the concepts around design thinking have been around for quite some time. Even early as back into the late 1930s. But with the rise of the web and the notion of creating really engaging experiences for people via websites and mobile devices, and then I think there's this notion of a series of practices that developed when it comes to designing with the user in mind, and quite naturally those processes started to be applied to other things, whether it's product development or designing physical spaces and whatnot. So this is a concept that has really exploded over the recent years and continues to do so. Let's look at some definitions. So David Kelly is one of the professors from Stanford University that actually founded a design firm out of this work that they did at Stanford. But he defined it as a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. Okay, makes sense. And as you might imagine, we started to think when we started to really dig into this, we said, well, this is what people are trying to do. People are trying to achieve business success when they think about bringing in new technology to their organization. What can we draw from the designer's toolkit to really emphasize the possibilities of this new technology and help people really achieve what they're trying to trying to do in the context of their business environment. So if you break down what Stanford has set out as really the parameters of design thinking, really they try to put it into 5 different phases. The first being empathize, then define, then ideate, then prototype, and then test. And we'll get into what all those mean shortly. But this seemed like a good, really solid framework from which to work off of. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Nielsen Norman Group. This is a firm that specializes in user experience design. And my background as a user experience designer, I've followed the Nielsen Norman Group for a number of years. But I really liked what they were saying in terms of how they applied design thinking when it comes to designing experiences in their world. And they talk about design thinking as a user-centered process that starts with user data, creates design artifacts that address real and non-imaginary user needs, and then tests those artifacts with real users. It leverages the collective expertise and establishes a shared language and buy-in amongst your team. And it encourages innovation by exploring multiple avenues for the same problem. Now, when we started to really understand these sub-concepts of design thinking, we started to say, the most successful projects that we've ever, or most successful technology selection projects that we've ever seen are really the ones that adhere to some of these principles. So we took it a step further and looked at some of the work that Jacob Nielsen was putting out, and some of the theories that he said. His quote was, "A wonderful interface solving the wrong problem will fail." Well, we started to say, just like that, wonderful technology solving the wrong problem will fail. You can pick the best technology, or what you think is the best technology, what all the industry experts are saying is the best technology, but if it doesn't solve your unique problems, it will be a failure. So here's what we started to do when we started to apply this design thinking processes and phases to tech selection. So we took the same 5 phases: empathy, definition, ideation, prototyping, and testing, and started to apply them to a logical winnowing down process from lots of different technology options to getting you down to the right option for what it is you're trying to do. So fundamentally, what we're trying to look at here is, as I mentioned, you have tons of options to you, but it's really key to create some stories that allow you to make sure you're hitting the right technology marketplaces. And this is confusing, and this is where analysts can certainly help, because we spend our days trying to make sense of the different marketplaces out there. And then it's really important for you to get to the right shortlist, and then test at various stages of the way to make sure that you're engaging with a vendor and product that is truly a right fit for your needs. So let's get into this. So the first phase is that empathy phase. So here, what we recommend to our clients is to not go about the traditional way of starting a technology selection project by going out and trying to capture every single requirement across your enterprise. Now, I think there's time for requirement gathering, but I would rather you start to hone in on what we like to call differentiating requirements. What really makes your situation unique. And in doing so, use those differentiating requirements as the basis of some narrative scenarios that really paint a picture of what it is you're trying to do. So paint a picture of what that future state might look like that encompasses the entire experience. So try to be as holistic as possible. Don't be really feature-based. Create that holistic picture of what it is you're trying to do, and do so in a way that is descriptive, but not overly prescriptive. So what I mean by that is, getting back to that concept that Jacob Nielsen talked about, is leave these scenarios open in a way so that you can explore different avenues for solving the same problem. So don't just write this in a way that there's only one way to solve this problem, but describe that problem, but leave it open for the vendors to potentially take varying different tacks at solving that problem, because how vendor A might solve this problem might be very different from vendor B. But it's really important for you and your selection teams to be able to see the different options, the different ways to solve the same challenge. So that's the first step. Create these narrative stories and make that really the bulk of the way that you describe your challenges to the different vendors. So again, I can't stress this enough. Don't start with requirements gathering as the step one to technology selection. There's plenty of time for that. And obviously, detailed requirement gathering will be really important to an implementation, but it doesn't have to be the first step in the overriding guiding piece of evidence in how you're going to select a vendor. Use those scenarios instead. So here's an example of some scenarios just to make this a little bit more real for you. So in this case, you want to use some actors, some personas that portray your real actual users. You want to make sure that you describe your real environments in which you work, whether that's on something as simple as a Firefox on a Mac or on a tablet out in an oil field. You want to really describe how your users are interacting with the content and the experiences that they'll be interacting with in a new system. You want to talk about your content and your unique content. You want to talk about your processes, and again, really paint a picture of how you would like things to work in a descriptive but not overly prescriptive way. So once you have those scenarios written, the next step is to find a short list of options whose fundamental strengths align with your unique needs. Now, this is easier said than done because, as we mentioned before, there's a lot of options out there. But where we see mistakes happen is we see people often looking to the marketplace and trying to figure out what is the best technology out there. And I hear that all the time. People ask us all the time, what's the best digital asset management system? What's the best web content management system? What's the best marketing automation system? What's the best CRM system? And quite frankly, there is no best. That's a mantra that we have around here, and we say it on a daily basis. But what I want you to do is get away from looking at a single snapshot view of a marketplace, but instead do your homework a little bit more and get into understanding which software vendors and which products were fundamentally built to achieve what you are trying to solve. So the way we advise our clients to do that is using some tools that we built, such as this one tool called the Real Quadrant Shortlist Generator. So here, what we ask you to do is answer a few questions, but the biggest question that we want you to ask is, what are you fundamentally trying to do? So here's some use cases that we ask you to self-identify with. So this is an example from our digital asset management Real Quadrant Shortlist Generator, where we ask you, with regards to digital asset management, in this case, are you trying to do advertising and marketing asset management, or basic brand management, or multilingual brand management, or multi-channel publishing, or audio and video production and reuse? Very different scenarios, but what we ask you to do is tell us what is most important to you, what are you trying to achieve, and then we ask you to give some rankings as to how important these are relative to each other. And from there, what we want you to do is maybe in certain cases, self-identify with a vertical expertise, and ultimately we'll spit out a real quadrant, which is fundamentally unique to your need, to your situation. So this is one real quadrant that we spit out. You don't know the criteria I put in, so it's not really important who lies where on this one, because what we try to do is, for each of our clients, they should expect a different real quadrant because no one's needs are exactly the same. So once you have the right scenarios written, the right shortlist identified, The next step is to create a way to test these vendors as to how good of a fit they are for you and your organization. So the way you need to do that is create some realistic test cases. So the first step is when you invite vendors into what we like to call a demo week. And it doesn't have to be a full week, but it's usually a course of 2 to 4 to 5 days where you don't allow vendors to come in and give the same canned, slick demonstration that they give to everyone else, the one that always looks nice and shiny and always works perfectly. Rather, we want you to challenge these vendors a little bit, and we want you to make them jump through a few hoops. So the key to make these vendor demos worthwhile is to make them real. So the first thing that we want you to do is certainly make sure your team is represented throughout the whole demo week. There's nothing that kills a demo week more when certain stakeholders attend some demos and not others. But when it comes to making this as real as possible, I want to get back to those scenarios. We tell the vendors that we have participated in our demo weeks that we want you to come and demonstrate scenarios 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or however many scenarios that you have, usually somewhere between 5 and 8. And we want you to demonstrate these scenarios in that particular order so that as you see the different demos from the different vendors, you're able to compare apples to apples to apples. It's really important, and it's really a much better use of your team's time to really be able to evaluate this in a structured process. If you just have the vendors come in and give their same CAN demo that they give everyone else, first of all, they're going to be showing you just the latest and greatest features and functionality that they've added to their products, which may be interesting, but is probably not what your team's going to be using on a 90% of their time when they use the system. So you want to make sure you make them real to your stakeholders' needs and make sure the vendors show you those things that are really important to you. Next is the prototype phase. So once you go through a vendor demo week, we found that it's usually pretty easy to get down to a set of 2 finalists. And at that phase, we recommend that you do something that we call competitive proofs of concept. Sometimes it's called a bake-off. And here, again, I want to emphasize making them as real as possible. So what we recommend at this phase is to go back to those scenarios, usually take a subset of the overall set of scenarios that you originally wrote. Pick the ones that are really the most important to you. Also, this is an opportunity to identify some of the big open questions you might have about particular vendors, about the 2 finalists, and actually use this POC in the truest sense of the term to prove some things out. But here's your chance to use those scenarios and have the vendors mimic an implementation project as much as possible. So what we ask them to do is guide us through an implementation project. So we want them to tell us what they need from us from a buyer's perspective. We want them to tell us what they need from us as a user perspective. And again, make this as real as possible by using your content, your people, whether your people are going to be involved with the implementation or involved with using the system, and your environments. So, if you're installing this technology in your environments, have the vendors come in and install it if you can. If you're going to be going into cloud environments, let's stand it up in the same cloud environment so that we learn the lessons about doing that, just like we will during implementation. So, perfect world, you do mimic real implementations with both of your finalist vendors. And what we found is you learn just so much about what it's like to work with the technology, but also what it's like to work with the people behind the technology. because this is your first chance to hopefully get beyond the sales teams of these technology vendors, but actually work with the people that would be doing an implementation of your project. Now, the big pushback here is, that this is a time and resource intensive exercise, and I would agree it can be, but really I can't stress enough that the most successful technology selections that I've ever seen are the ones that put a lot of time into this competitive proof of concept or bake-off phase, because it's your chance to make this as real as possible, both from an implementation perspective, but also what it's like to use the system and work with the people behind the system. So what we're proposing here is that you adopt an iterative approach where instead of putting all those requirements down at the beginning, you sketch some light, if possibly imperfect requirements. And as you all learn about what the different options are available to you from a vendor perspective, you see different ways of solving the same problem from the different vendors, you have an opportunity to kind of refine what you're looking for over time. And you're testing at every single step of the way. You're testing scenario fit, you're testing technology fit, you're testing partner fit, and you're testing value fit as you learn more about the vendor and the vendor learns more about you. Hopefully that helps in negotiating an ultimate contract as you move closer and closer to signing on with a future partner. So I just wanted to get back to some of the concepts that the Nielsen Norman Group puts out there. They talk about design thinking, developing 3 significant components of common ground in teams: a shared vocabulary, tangible artifacts, and a trust-based team culture. And what we found is when you apply design thinking to the technology selection process, you get all 3 of these. You get a shared vocabulary in the form of those scenarios. What I found is, unlike the traditional approach of developing a laundry list of requirements, when you go the scenario route, it really helps bring your team together and really helps everyone understand what a future state could look like, as opposed to trying to piece together this huge list of requirements in an Excel spreadsheet and trying to make sense of what it might look like in the future. Tangible artifacts, actually building out real working proofs of concepts, that's a really valuable thing. It's at that point, you're not just taking a vendor's word for what they're going to create and what the future might look like. Your people are actually getting the chance to get their hands on this technology and try it out themselves and see what it's going to be like working in a new system. We can't underestimate the fact that bringing in new technology in today's day and age is changing the way people work, and to get a real sense of what that new work environment might be is really important before you're too late. And finally, a process like this creates a trust-based team culture. I'm sure all of you have seen situations where IT has gone about a technology selection without the business, and business has gone about technology selection without IT. And what we found is going about a process like this, where you create holistic views of a future state in the form of scenarios, where you involve all stakeholders, whether they're IT, business, legal, casual contributors, super users, admins, and the like. You really get everyone feeling like they're involved, and you don't, and people don't feel like they're being forced to use a new technology once the decision's already been made. People feel like they've had a chance to contribute throughout the process, so they feel more invested in the process, and ultimately we feel like this is a first step in a productive and worthwhile change management process. So what I've described here is a little bit different approach than the traditional method. So instead of spending a lot of time up front trying to capture every single requirement that exists across the organization as it relates to this new technology, and then spending a bit of time on the RFP proposals and demos, then leading into a project implementation project with a big bang release. What I'm suggesting here is take a more iterative test-based approach where you spend a little bit less time on requirements at the beginning, but rather hone in on those differentiating requirements. Spend a lot of time developing your way to market, your RFP with the scenarios as the bulk of those. Spend a lot of time doing those demos, and then spend a considerable time in a true bake-off, a true competitive proof of concept. And that work is always important and always useful going forward, as if you do that bake-off correctly, you should be able to roll that work right into a live pilot and ultimately roll it right into a phased implementation. So ultimately, we're trying to say you get more value, more lessons delivered earlier in the process, as opposed to doing lots of detailed work and finding out it's not what you expected only later in the process. So with that, we're running out of time, but I do have a question here. And while I sort through these questions, I just wanted to call your attention to a subscriber-only webinar that we're doing next week. I know there's a bunch of subscribers on the line today. I hope to see you next week on March 1st at noon Eastern time, where I'll be talking about navigating the 2018 digital asset management divide, which we're seeing some real interesting trends happening in the DAM space as it relates to marketing technology stacks as a whole, and some really interesting changes that are going to put a lot of pressure on potential DAM buyers and DAM practitioners. So hope to see you then. So question that I have here is, at any point, do you end up with a detailed set of requirements? And if so, when? Is it that before the bake-off or after? So that's a great question, Kara. And Kara, I would say that throughout this whole process, you're always capturing requirements. So that I don't want to make it seem like we're ignoring requirements gathering. You're definitely gathering requirements throughout the entire process. And as you go through this, you're going to learn different things along the way and keep adding to those requirements. However, as it relates to picking the product, I think the mistake is using all those requirements as the bulk of an RFP and sending that out. It seems to be like a waste of time just to use that as the bulk. So honing in on those differentiating requirements to start, but don't lose sight of some of the requirements that come up along the way. So you're constantly gathering them. But really, the time for the true requirements gathering to me is as you're in the bake-off phase and leading into an implementation project starting, right? That's when you're designing the system at that point. So use the scenarios to pick your products, but keep collecting your requirements and use your requirements to truly inform how you're going to implement this technology. All right, folks, there's a few more questions, but we are out of time, so I won't take up too much more of your time today, but I do want to thank you all again for spending some time with me today, as always, with Real Story Group's webinar series. We really appreciate it. I do encourage you all to download a free chapter from any one of the marketplaces that we cover. Go to realstorygroup.com/sample. Happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn or via email or Twitter. And again, if you do want a copy of the Right Way to Select Technology book, either in hardcover or e-copy, feel free to use this special discount RM-SRT to get a 20% discount code. And with that, I'll wrap up and say thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you again soon. Looking forward to connecting. Thank you.